It was a Tuesday afternoon when my bank called to tell me someone had just tried to wire $47,000 out of my account, and the authorization signature on the transfer form was mine, except I hadn't signed anything. I was standing in my driveway in Durham, North Carolina, holding a bag of groceries, when the fraud specialist asked me to confirm whether I'd initiated the transfer. I said no. She said the form had been submitted in person at a branch in Raleigh, 40 minutes away, by a man who presented my power of attorney. I only had one power of attorney on file. My son-in-law. Tell me where you're watching from and what time it is right now, because at 2:17 on a Tuesday afternoon, I thought I was just a retired man having a bad day. I had no idea I was standing at the front door of the worst 18 months of my life. My name is Arthur, and I'm 67 years old. I spent 31 years as a civil engineer for the city of Durham, designed drainage systems and road infrastructure across 4 counties, retired at 62 with a pension and a house that was paid off and a savings account I'd built carefully, deliberately, the way you build anything that has to last. My wife, Cora, used to say I approached money the same way I approached concrete. Slowly, with intention, and always with an eye on what happens when the ground shifts underneath you. Cora passed 4 years ago. Ovarian cancer. 14 months from diagnosis to the end. The kind of loss that doesn't get smaller with time. It just gets more familiar, like a scar you stop noticing until someone touches it. We'd been married 38 years. She was a school librarian who read 2 books a week until the week she couldn't anymore, and she had this ability to look at a person and understand what they wanted before they said a word. That gift skipped our daughter, I think, or maybe our daughter just didn't use it when she should have. Our daughter, Renee, our daughter, is 34. She's warm-hearted and trusting in the way that some people are, and never lose, even when the world gives them every reason to. She married her husband, Kevin, when she was 29. He was 32 at the time, a financial consultant from Charlotte with a pressed suit, and a confident handshake, and the kind of smile that fills a room and doesn't ask permission. I had reservations from the beginning, not about anything specific, just a feeling. The kind Cora would have named in 10 seconds, and I dismissed in myself because I thought I was being protective in the way fathers get protective and talk themselves out of. Kevin always had an answer ready for every question, for every concern, for every quiet hesitation I ever raised. He was smooth in the way that sometimes means polished and sometimes means practiced, and I could never quite tell which one I was looking at. He treated my daughter well, as far as I could see. He was attentive, affectionate, remembered birthdays, and called on holidays, and once drove 4 hours in a rainstorm to be at her side when she had a minor surgery. When they asked if they could move into my guest suite for a few months while their condo renovation finished, I said yes without much debate. That was 14 months before the phone call from the bank. In those 14 months, the renovation somehow kept extending. 6 weeks became 3 months. 3 months became 6. There was always a reason. Contractor delays, permit issues, a flooding problem in the adjacent unit that affected their timeline. I didn't push. They were quiet guests. Kevin worked from home some days, took calls on the back porch. My daughter cooked dinner twice a week, and it felt, for a while, like the house had some of its noise back. What I didn't notice, what I should have noticed, was how gradually Kevin became involved in my finances. It started small. He offered to review my investment portfolio because, he said, he was seeing a lot of retirees getting underperforming returns. I appreciated the gesture. He suggested consolidating 2 of my brokerage accounts into one for easier management. Reasonable enough. He mentioned that updating my estate planning documents would save my daughter a lot of headache down the road, and he knew an estate attorney in Raleigh who did excellent work. I'd been meaning to update things since Cora died. I went. The attorney, a quiet man in his 50s named someone I can't place now, had me sign several documents that day. Kevin sat in the room. He said it was to help me keep track of everything. The attorney walked me through each page. I signed where I was told to sign. I came home feeling like I'd finally gotten around to something important. I didn't know one of those documents was a durable power of attorney that gave Kevin broad authority over my financial accounts. He never said that's what it was. The attorney presented it as a standard part of estate planning, which it can be, but the scope of what I'd signed was never explained to me plainly. And Kevin sat in that room and said nothing to clarify it. By the time the bank called me in my driveway, Kevin had already spent 11 months positioning himself for exactly what he tried to do that Tuesday. The $47,000 wire was blocked because the fraud specialist flagged the unusual amount and geographic pattern. But it wasn't the first attempt. It was just the first one that failed. I didn't know any of that when I stood in my driveway with my groceries getting warm and my heart doing something I can only describe as a slow collapse. My first thought was not Kevin. My first thought was error. Some kind of administrative mistake, a glitch. Someone else's problem that had attached itself to my account. Because that is what we do when the answer is too close to home. We look for every other explanation first. I drove to the bank in person. A branch manager named, a woman in her 40s, professional and measured, sat across from me and walked me through what had happened. The power of attorney document on file was legitimate. Kevin had presented it. The teller had processed the transfer request. The fraud flag had caught it not because of the POA, but because the wire destination was an account that had been flagged previously in an unrelated case. She pulled up the account activity for the past year and slid the screen toward me. I sat in that chair and I looked at my own financial history the way you sometimes look at an old photo, where something is wrong and you can't name it at first, and then all at once you can see it everywhere. There were transfers I didn't remember authorizing, withdrawals in amounts just under the reporting threshold, spread out over months, methodical and patient. An investment account I'd been told was consolidating had actually been drained. A second account I didn't know existed had been opened in my name and Kevin's, and money had been moving through it in patterns I couldn't follow without help. In 11 months, roughly $190,000 had moved out of my accounts through mechanisms Kevin had put in place, slowly, carefully, one reasonable-sounding step at a time. I drove home. I sat in the kitchen where Cora used to read on Sunday mornings. I didn't call my daughter. Not yet. I called my brother instead because he is 10 years younger than me and he's been a detective with the Guilford County Sheriff's Office for 22 years, and he knew what to do before I finished telling him what I'd found. He was at my house in an hour and a half. He sat across from me at the kitchen table and didn't say anything for a moment after I finished. Then he said, "Arthur, this is not a mistake. This is a plan, and we need to respond to it like one." He connected me with a financial crimes investigator named a woman who specialized in elder financial abuse cases, which is what mine was, though the word elder sat in my chest like something foreign for a week before I could say it without flinching. She reviewed the documents Kevin had filed, traced the account activity, and within 4 days confirmed what my brother suspected. Kevin had executed a scheme that investigators said they saw variations of several times a year. A family member, usually a spouse or child or in-law, gains proximity to an older adult. They present as helpful. They introduce themselves gradually into financial decisions, establish legal authority through documents the victim doesn't fully understand, and then move money in increments designed to avoid detection. In my case, Kevin had also taken out a home equity line of credit against my property, which the POA allowed him to do, and drawn $38,000 from it over 6 months. My house, the house I'd paid off, had debt on it that I hadn't known about. The investigator told me we had a choice. We could alert Kevin now, which would likely cause him to move assets, destroy evidence, and retain legal counsel before we had a complete picture. Or we could spend 2 to 3 weeks building a case while I went home and acted as though nothing had changed. I want you to understand what that feels like. Going home to a man who has been quietly dismantling your financial life for nearly a year, sitting across from him at dinner, asking about his day, watching him pour coffee in your kitchen with the ease of someone who feels completely safe. My daughter sat between us some nights, telling stories about work, laughing at something on television, and I would look at her face and think about what I was going to have to tell her. And I would have to look away. She knew something was wrong. She said so. About a week in, "Dad, you've been quiet. Are you feeling okay?" I told her my knee was bothering me. She believed me because I'm the kind of person who doesn't dramatize physical complaints, so when I mention something, it tends to be real. I hated lying to her. I understood why I had to. I told my brother when I suspected Kevin was starting to sense something. His behavior had shifted slightly. He was more attentive to me, more solicitous, the way people are when they're trying to recalibrate. He offered twice in 1 week to take me to a doctor's appointment. He started asking questions about how I was feeling, about my sleep, about whether I'd spoken to my attorney recently. My brother said, "He's trying to figure out what you know." On the 14th day, the investigator told me we had enough. Bank records, the unauthorized home equity line, transaction documentation, and, the piece that made the case, a series of text messages Kevin had sent to a woman in Charlotte, a former colleague, in which he described what he was doing with a specificity that suggested he had done something like this before, and was confident he wouldn't be caught. In one message, he referred to my money as the inheritance that's already mine, just moved up by a few years. I read that on the investigator's laptop screen sitting in my brother's car outside a Cracker Barrel in Durham because that was the only place we could meet without Kevin seeing. I read it twice. Then I put the laptop down and looked out at the parking lot for a long time. There are moments where you understand something not just with your mind, but with your whole body. The way he'd come to the estate attorney, the way he'd sat in that room while I signed documents, the years of dinners and holidays and the drive through the rainstorm to be at my daughter's hospital room. I didn't know anymore what was real and what was staging. I still don't, entirely. I think I never will. My brother wanted to arrest Kevin at the house. I asked him to let me tell my daughter first. He said, "Arthur, if she tells him, she won't." I said, "She's going to be devastated. But she won't protect him once she knows. That is not who she is." He looked at me for a moment. "You know your kid." "I know my kid." I told her that evening. I asked Kevin to take a walk to the hardware store for something I said I needed, and while he was gone, I sat my daughter down at the kitchen table and told her everything from the beginning. I watched her face in a way I hadn't since she was small. Confusion first. Then something that wasn't quite disbelief, more like the feeling of a world rearranging itself into a shape that doesn't match the map you've been using. Then, very quietly, she started to cry. "How long?" she asked. "About 11 months that we can trace." She was silent for a moment. "The renovation," she said. "Not a question. Just a piece falling into place. Probably, yes. He kept saying it was delayed. I never went to check. I never." She stopped. "Dad, I never." She stopped. "Dad, I never went to look." "Honey, you trusted your husband. That's not a flaw. He used my name, didn't he?" "Some of this is in my name too. Your name appears on the joint account. The investigator believes you weren't aware. The text messages confirm he didn't tell you." She looked at me with an expression I can't fully describe. Grief and shame and fury layered in a way that made her look older for a moment than I've ever seen her. "I brought him into your house. I let him in." "Dad, that's not an accusation. I'm telling you the truth. He was convincing and I let him in, and what happened next is his doing, not yours and not mine." Kevin came home 40 minutes later. My brother and a financial crimes investigator were waiting in the living room. 2 uniformed officers stood on the front porch. He stopped in the doorway when he saw them. He looked at me. Then he looked at my daughter, who was sitting on the couch with her hands folded and her eyes dry by then, and I saw something cross his face that I think was the moment he understood the performance was over. Kevin Aldridge, my brother said, you're being placed under arrest on charges of financial elder abuse, theft by deception, unauthorized use of a power of attorney, and obtaining property under false pretenses. He didn't fight it. He became very still and very quiet in the way that people do when they're already calculating the next move. He asked to call his attorney before they'd finished reading him his rights. He didn't look at my daughter again. She watched them take him out and didn't move from the couch until the door closed. Then she put her face in her hands, not crying exactly, something more like releasing pressure. I sat next to her and didn't say anything for a while, which is the only appropriate response to some kinds of pain. I thought I knew him, she finally said. I know. 7 years, Dad. I thought I knew everything about him. You knew the version he allowed you to know. That's not the same as knowing someone. She turned to look at me. Did Mum ever meet him? Once, at your engagement dinner. What did she think? I didn't answer right away. Cora had said to me in private afterward, he's going to spend his whole life getting what he needs from people who trust him. I hope your daughter is paying attention. I hadn't told Renee that. There hadn't seemed to be a reason. She thought he was handsome, I said, and she thought you were happy. My daughter nodded. She seemed to understand the rest. The legal process moved over the following 7 months. Kevin's attorney argued that the power of attorney was valid and that the transactions, while aggressive, fell within its scope. The estate attorney who drawn up the documents faced his own inquiry. Kevin's text messages were admitted as evidence. The DA added charges when investigators found a woman in Greensboro, an elderly widow who had experienced a similar pattern of financial loss with Kevin as her financial advisor 4 years prior. That case had been closed without charges. It was reopened. Kevin was convicted on 4 counts and sentenced to 9 years in state prison. His attorney filed an appeal on the POA scope argument. The court denied it. He will be eligible for parole in 6 years. My brother says he probably won't get it. My daughter filed for divorce from the county jail, serving the papers to her attorney. She moved back into my house, the 2nd bedroom this time, not the guest suite, and we spent about 3 months being very careful around each other in the way you are when you both feel responsible for something, and neither of you wants to add to the other's weight. She started seeing a therapist. So did I, which is not something I'd done before in 67 years, and which I would recommend to anyone who thinks they're past the age where it might help them. It helps. It doesn't fix anything, but it gives you a place to set things down for an hour without performing okay for anybody. I've spent a good amount of the past year undoing what Kevin set in motion. The home equity line was challenged and eventually settled. I recovered most of it through the restitution ordered at sentencing, though I was told clearly that collection can take years. 2 of the brokerage accounts were partially recoverable. The $190,000 is unlikely to be fully returned. I've made peace with what I won't see again, which is its own kind of work. The estate attorney's license is under review. I retained a new attorney, someone my brother recommended, someone whose office I visited without Kevin anywhere nearby, and I reviewed every document until I understood every sentence. The new power of attorney is held by my brother. The financial accounts have beneficiary designations and multi-step authorization requirements that would have prevented most of what happened. I should have had all of this years ago. I know that now. My daughter is doing what I'd call the slow work of rebuilding trust, not in Kevin, who is beyond that for her now, but in her own judgment. She's hard on herself in the way that smart people sometimes are when they feel they should have seen something they didn't. I tell her that Kevin spent years learning how to not be seen, and that her trust was not a weakness. It was a target. There's a difference. Last month we drove down to Myrtle Beach for a long weekend, something Cora and I used to do every spring. My daughter doesn't love the beach the way Cora did, but she walked it every morning with me anyway, and we talked the way you talk when you've been through something and come out on the other side still knowing each other's names. On the 2nd morning she said, I keep thinking about the estate attorney. How he just sat there while I signed those documents. He'll answer for that. But nobody stopped it. You were right there, and I was right there, and nobody stopped it. I know. She picked up a shell and turned it in her hand. How do you trust anything after something like that? I thought about how Cora used to answer questions she knew didn't have clean answers. She'd always take the full weight of them, never reached for the quick reply. You don't trust everything again, I said. You trust carefully. You ask more questions than feels polite. You let people earn it in small amounts before you give it in large ones. And you pay attention to what they do when they think nobody's watching. That's the only way I know. She was quiet for a while. Then Mum would have seen him. Yes, she would have. I think I'm starting to see things more the way she did. I put my arm around her shoulder, and we walked to the end of the pier and looked at the water for a while without saying anything, and I thought that of all the things that man had tried to take from me, he had not taken this morning, this daughter, this particular quiet that comes from surviving something together. I think about the bank fraud specialist sometimes, a woman whose name I never got, working a routine shift, who fragged a transaction that should have been routine and made a phone call that changed everything. I think about my brother driving 90 minutes without asking any questions first. I think about my daughter watching her husband led out in handcuffs and choosing, even in that moment, to reach over and take my hand instead of his. There are people who love you by what they do when it costs them something. That's the only measure that holds. If you're watching this and something in your gut has been telling you that a person close to you isn't what they appear to be, if the numbers don't quite add up, if the explanations always arrive just before you can ask the right question, if someone has slowly made themselves necessary in a way that feels less like help and more like positioning, listen to that. Get a second set of eyes from someone who doesn't have a stake in reassuring you. Ask to understand every document before you sign it, and know that the people who love you will not be offended by your caution. Only the people who are depending on your trust will. I'm sitting on my porch in Durham right now, and Renee is inside making coffee, and the yard needs attention, and that's enough. That is more than enough. Tell me in the comments. Have you ever had someone earn your trust over time only to discover you'd been reading them wrong the whole while? Did you listen to the quiet feeling that something was off, or did you push it down? I want to hear from you. Every story you share might be the warning someone else needs to catch something before it's too late. If this reached you, share it. Subscribe to Voices of Uncle Samuel. And remember, the most dangerous person in your life is rarely the stranger. It's the one who already knows where you keep everything. I keep coming back to the moment I sat in that bank manager's office and looked at my own account history like it was a stranger's. Everything was there, the dates, the amounts, the slow and patient pattern of it, and I remember thinking that the most painful part wasn't the money. It was the recognition that I had handed someone the tools to do this, one reasonable-sounding step at a time, because I wanted to believe the picture he was showing me was real. Kevin didn't steal from me in a moment of desperation. He built toward it over years. That kind of thing doesn't happen without a person who has made a quiet decision, somewhere along the way, that other people's trust is a resource to be used rather than a responsibility to be honored. That's a choice. Not a circumstance, not a pressure, not a bad day. A choice made repeatedly with full knowledge of what it cost someone else. And what I've learned the hard way and at considerable expense is that those choices always carry a weight the person making them eventually has to carry too. Kevin is serving 9 years. His plan, which he described in his own words as math, turned out to have consequences he didn't account for. That's not justice delivered from somewhere above. That's just the nature of what happens when you build a life on something hollow. It collapses under its own structure. What I wish I'd had more of, looking back, is the willingness to think clearly when clarity was uncomfortable. I had the information. Cora had seen it. My own gut had registered something in those early dinners when Kevin's answers came just a little too smoothly. but I let the comfort of a good surface override the discipline of a harder question. Wisdom isn't about knowing more facts. It's about being willing to follow your honest thinking even when it leads somewhere you'd rather not go. I didn't do that. And that gap between what I sensed and what I allowed myself to examine is where Kevin operated for 11 months. My daughter carries her own version of this. She's been working through it with more grace than I think I would manage at her age. What I see in her now, in the way she asks questions before she trusts, in the way she reads documents before she signs them, in the way she sits with discomfort instead of reaching for the reassuring explanation, that is a kind of strength that doesn't come from easy times. It comes from having walked through something that cost you and deciding that what it teaches you is worth more than what it took. I'm proud of her in a way I don't entirely have words for. And the resilience, that's the part that surprised me. I'm 67 years old. I lost a significant portion of what I spent 31 years building. There were weeks where I wasn't sure I had the energy to fight through the legal process, the account recovery, the paperwork, the waiting. But you find out what you're made of, not when things are going well, but when you're sitting in a car, outside a Cracker Barrel in Durham, reading a man's text messages about your own money, and you have to decide what you do next. I decided to do the next right thing, and then the one after that. That's all resilience ever really is, not some extraordinary reserve, just the willingness to keep going when stopping would be easier. Cora used to say that the truth doesn't need your help to come out. It just needs time. She was right about that, and she was right about Kevin, and I should have listened sooner. But I'm listening now,